We found actually the biggest transition to be from college to the working environment. You still have some time to yourself, trying to work an assistant into your day when you're at the college level is a lot easier because, you've got 3 hours of class a day or 4 hours of class a day. When you transition to the working world, all of a sudden you're expected, devote your 8 to 10 hours a day to your employer, and hard to tell your employer you need to take a break to do this or have an assistant come in to do that. And just the physical barriers of the working world schools are laid out so well to be accessible and adaptive, and not every office environment is.
If you have less than 100 employees, they do not have to make accommodations. So you might think that you can have an accommodation. They are not obligated to do that unless they're a large organization.
So our daughter Tori has just transitioned out of high school into college. So we have just done our first round of interviewing for PAs. We call them caregivers in Canada, so if I refer to caregivers. We found that we had to take a very structured approach to it to make it successful. She requires 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care. So we had to interview, she has 10 PAs on staff right now. And we found that the most important thing was to actually come to the interview extremely prepared for it. We have a list of questions. Tori and I tag team the interview. So I come with a list of questions that are looking mostly at work ethic, the caregiver's personality, where her list of questions will be very targeted towards specific needs. How much can they lift? Are they willing to lift? Toileting. So hers are very caregiver specific, where mine are more work ethic specific. And we work the interview together that way.
And that works well, doesn't it?
It works really well. We also have to be very detailed when we do the hiring process. So we have an entire hiring kit that we use for our process because we find that if we're very detailed in having a full job description, we have an 8-page contract, and if we're very detailed when we do the interview and the hiring process, the orientation, that we end up with a better qualified PA down the road and less issues down the road as well.
Anecdotally, I think most of the clinicians I work with will agree with me, though I don't know if it's been researched, that the correlation between good caregiving, having good caregivers, and the utilization of assistive technology seem to correlate. There is an abandonment rate of technology around 30 to 50%, depending on what research. And what we find is that often we can tell when a caregiver seems to be integrated into the family and seems to treat their charge like a family member, or with a degree of professionalism, and not. Sometimes we'll have a caregiver deliver a patient and then leave and come back at the end of the session, and it's very telling.
One of the things that I do when I'm talking to my high school students about this is there are very different types of personalities, and some they don't want their caregiver there for everything. They really want the chance to have a little romance and to make their own relationships. And, I think it depends, and it does depend on the level of weakness. Because if you really have to have a round-the-clock caregiver, there's no privacy. You're used to having sort of a certain modicum of privacy, and you have none. And so if your caregiver is someone who isn't attentive to your needs, and you're really I think it puts you in the situation of a potential abuse situation if you don't pick the right people, not on purpose, but just because they don't really, if they aren't experienced in doing this, which a lot of college students get other students who are new to it, and it's a matter of convenience. And they want to do it. These other students want to do it, but they might not actually have any background or skills in terms of understanding about SMA or what someone might need.
How do you get your personal assistant to respect boundaries regarding personal issues such as dating or socializing?
You have to create a relationship with them, and you set the boundaries, and they will work according to those boundaries as long as they're reasonable. I think it's important to understand And I've had these conversations with my daughter that these people are responsible for you, and so you can't say go away and come back when I call you and I don't know where you are. Okay, you cannot do that. It's not fair to them, it's not fair to anybody involved, including you and your safety. So they have to have a relationship, and with smartphones and other things, you can have some privacy, you can do that, but it's very important to understand the seriousness of that relationship. They're employees, and they're held accountable if something is wrong, and a lot of things can go wrong. So it's a serious matter, but they're adults, and guess what? As parents, we don't have a say anymore.
My experience and sense is that there is a risk for, depending on the family situation, for increased social isolation as you make that final transition. I don't know if this is stuff that you've seen as well. And so I think the psychosocial aspects perhaps get a bit lost in the mix, and it's not clear if there's a proactive plan to necessarily address it, but to remain alive to the fact that it's tough for all kids. Absolutely, it's tough for all kids, and just that much more so for those affected by SMA.
Speaking of social isolation, I think, it's. I'm impressed how carefully you guys talk about screening them and so on. I mean, many of my, patients aren't psychologically prepared to do that, and they love the social interaction. So it's easy to, they want to be friends with that person, and they really enjoy it. And it's easy to blur those boundaries. And we've had romantic relationships. We've had, real bonds of friendship. But that is when you have to be even more careful about that. And I think that is the nice thing about having someone closer to their age. But then there's some really important things about having a sort of a strictly professional person. And I think it depends on the kid, young adult, kind of, and what their needs are. I mean, many of my, especially, I don't know if it's a perception, just my experience, but young men are not nearly as willing to kind of be as outgoing in screening sometimes as the young women are. And
It's more the whatever school.
It's sort of, I don't know that they are quite as prepared sometimes to do that. And I think the parents sometimes, they've been so protected for so many years. It's such a dramatic change.
As hard as it is to be present, you have to be present. You can't stay at home.
Okay.
If you have an interest, you have to get out of the house and go pursue it.
Right.
It's so easy sometimes to say, you know what, I don't feel like going out, or I don't want to go out. But sometimes being present is the most important role.
Right.